Do you want to know how you can create a sales presentation that actually has an impact, that actually drives new business? Then this episode is for you. Hello, Sales Nation, and welcome to today's episode of the Salesman podcast. On today's show, we have Kate LeVan, author of Speaking with Strategic Impact. You can find out more about Kate over at LeVanPartners.com. And on today's episode, we're diving into exactly that. Creating a strategic, impactful sales presentation that differentiates you from the competition and allows you to win more business. There's 4 steps to this. We only scratch the surface of it all. And it's, having said that, we go crazy deep. So if you enjoy this episode, check out Kate's book. And with all that said, let's jump right in. Kate, welcome to the Salesman podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Will. I'm glad we finally connected.
Yep, I'm glad to have you on. I'm glad to dive into this. I think we can go deep pretty quick, and we've done other conversations, other podcasts on presentations, on strategic presentations, but I think you're the person that can take us that level deeper through the onion, so to speak, and we'll see what we get out of this one. And we're gonna tee it up of the structure within your book, which is the who, the what, the way, and the how. And starting with the who. What do we need to know about the people that are going to be in the room, and how does our presentation reflect back on this information that we have?
Well, this is the most important step, and that's why it's the first step. And if your viewing and listening audience doesn't remember anything else from our conversation, I want them to know that this is where they need to spend most of their time, not on slides, not on other things that they might be worried about, because this is going to be the source of their engagement and their confidence. So I like to tell people to think in terms of buckets of inquiry, and I usually have 4. The rational bucket, the emotional bucket, the decision-making process bucket, and then communication styles. Most people only pay attention to the rational bucket. That is, what information did they ask for? How much do they know or not know? How much time do we need to talk about something? Those are the types of things that are often in a request for proposal, but you know, if you really think about it, the people who wrote that request for proposal probably aren't the people in the room who are going to decide whether you get the business or not. So you need to focus on those people, find out who they are and how they interact. So the most important bucket could be the emotional bucket. You know, you've probably heard the factoid that a lot of important decisions are 60 to 70% based on emotional, political, cultural reasons. So you need to know the tension and dynamic in that room, either reflecting on what you know about the people in the room already, or talking to third parties about that, or talking to the people themselves. You know, when I do one of these consulting engagements where I'm helping an organization do a pitch, I try to manufacture touch points that allow us to listen to how people express themselves, find out what they think is more important than something else, understand what's at stake for them in bringing us in as a business partner. So all of those things are critical, and little cultural things as well. If you don't mind, I'd like to tell you a little story here.
Yeah, go for it.
I was recently talking to a finance director who routinely sat in on pitches that were made to the organization. And this person was part of a very large energy company in the Midwestern United States. And he commented on the fact that, you know, everybody just talked about how big they were. We're big, you're big, we're going to do big things together. And the problem was that he said, you know, we think of ourselves as really a small town organization because everybody who works here comes from Ohio, right? So the tipping point, and when everybody looks the same as far as the different vendors they're considering, the tipping point is often going to be who looks like us and who do we want to work with and who makes us feel comfortable. And that little piece of cultural knowledge is critical, and that's what you want to play to in the room. So that emotional piece is huge. The other ones, of course, once you find out who's in the room, you want to think about how they interact with one another. So who influences whom? I think we've all been in situations where title doesn't mean anything, right? That somebody else has some more influence than you might expect. And you forgot to look at them and you forgot to give them any attention. So you want to make sure you understand that. And then finally, when it comes to communication style, of those decision makers, the key people in the room, what do they think is a good meeting? What type of evidence is important to them? what's more important than something else. So it's from understanding this current state of your audience that you're walking into that you're going to be able to put the emphasis on the right things, engage them in the right way, and really feel more confident as a result of it.
There is so much to unpack here, Kate. I'm gonna start. Gonna start with a. I was struggling to keep my mouth shut then and let you just run through it without interrupting you. But I'll start with an example of HubSpot. So they supported a whole bunch of our live events towards the beginning of this year, and hopefully some more towards next year, where we're doing live interviews at different sales conferences. And they approached me. They wanted to just do some kind of business. They wanted to just work with me in some kind of manner. And in hindsight, I screwed up. I messed up. And I had a really good opportunity here to, and inadvertently it all worked out, which I'll explain in a second, but I had a huge opportunity to match the culture, to get all this information beforehand, before I had these essentially meetings, but over the phone or over Skype versus in person. And I screwed up because they are super public about what their corporate culture is, what they want from people that they work from. There's literally a document of not freelancers, but outsourced work that they do, what they expect from you. I didn't Google, research, or look into any of this. I was just happy that they wanted to work with me and the outreach to me. So I just jumped straight with 2 feet. Then it was in hindsight, a few months later, I interviewed Michael Peachy, who is I think he's the director of sales. Is the title he holds over there. And he was talking about company culture, company fit, all this stuff that perhaps we somewhat pay attention to, but I don't think we pay enough attention to, because this could be a differentiator. As you said, if there's a bunch of vendors in front of you, the people who pricing out the question, everything else out the question, if there's one that has a culture fit and you want to work with those individuals, you're more likely to go with them on an emotional front than anything else. Well, Michael pointed out to me that, and we brought it up in the interview, the guidelines of people to work with internally matched what they expected from people externally to, when they're applying for these roles, to work towards. And I fitted all of them. And it was only by fluke, essentially, and the fact that they hunted me out and looked for me, that I fitted all their cultural norms. So with all that said, for HubSpot, it's an easy process. You go on their website. The bottom bar of the website has all these links, and it has essentially links to these documents which you can download, and you can align your pitch, your conversations, your emails, your outreach, whatever it is. If you're trying to sell to that company, you can align it with all this language, with even the colors, with the wording that they want to be used, the fact they don't want swearing on the fact that it's an inbound company as opposed to an external pushing outbound sales company. You can tie all this together. How do we uncover all of this information when we're going into pitch with a new organization that we don't know the individuals personally, that perhaps this is the first or second time we're going to be in the room with them? How do we do the research to pull out all these insights?
Well, I think it's funny that you said, I didn't even think to do this. There's so much available to us now on social media as well as websites. And, there are certain things that we can, general assumptions that we can make. I know that there are some people, consultants, for instance, when I know that they've been trained within a certain management consulting firm, they're extremely analytical. So there are some assumptions that we're going to make by some of the data we pick up, but that doesn't get us to some of those emotional, political, cultural motivators. And that's where we need to rely maybe on third parties who have more experience with these audience members. So talking to so-and-so who knows so-and-so. But also, a lot of times in the more complex sales, there are third parties who are conducting the search. And a lot of times we don't try to win them over. They're our first audience member that we need to win over, because it's through them that we might get some of these insights. So when I talked about let's manufacture some reasons to talk to these people and not treat this presentation like a beauty pageant, right? Where nobody can see anybody until we actually get in the room. No, to have a conversation with them, and number one, really respect their process. That's how you build rapport with them, with that third party searcher. But also to put your questions and your problems in front of them. This is your opportunity to say, well, I know you asked us to spend time to talk about all of our contract arrangements that we might have with our clients, but that sounds like it's going to eat up a lot of time. Might we do this a little bit differently and send that ahead so that we can really spend more time in the room on what's important to the people in the room? Could you get that? Could you ask them about that? Would that be allowable? And so you are very respectful that they have a process, and gee, I'm sorry I'm bringing this problem to you, but it often leads to a bending of the rules. And here's the other thing. As much information as you may be getting, you're also sending signals that we're smart, we care about the business, we want the business. And by the way, I've been in these situations where the third-party searching consultant will say, well, if I tell you this, I have to tell all the other vendors this information as well. And I say, well, thank you very much. That's great. We have no problem with that because we've already scored, because that person's going to go back. And when they say, well, how's the search going? They're going to say, hey, there's this really smart, I used to be with an advertising agency. There's a really sharp agency and they're asking really good questions. And you end up being the front runner coming in, which is where you want to start.
I love this. So we used to do this selling medical devices to the NHS here in the UK. I love the phrase that you used there, Kate, of bending the rules. I would always go to the procurement team who are supposed to be a third party, but they're still held within the same trust, the same organization. So they're not really, they've all got the same objectives, goals, and getting paid by the same people. But we'd go to them and I would always ask if we could go last during the tender process to present, or last to do a demonstration with the equipment in theatres. And 9 times out of 10, you'd go, yeah, no one else has asked about order, and so come in whenever you want. And that slight bending of the rules then gives you the advantage of, clearly in a demo scenario, you get to let everyone else go through all the mistakes, hear all the objections, and when they get to you, you can go through the benefits that other people have mentioned, discussed, and you can throw your kind of spanner in their works and hopefully pitch your kind of process and everything that you're about to them in the best light without any rebuttals from anyone else. So this bending the rules, what should we be looking out to bend the rules on? Because there seems like a fine line here between respecting the process and leveraging it to our benefit. Is it a fine line, or can we perhaps get away with more than what we expect?
I think you can get away with more than you expect because people are just people.
Yeah.
And they don't know how this process is going to go. They think they have this, very defined way it should go. And then you present them with an issue and you give them the benefit that they might get from it. And the point here is to build rapport with that person so that he or she says, okay, they're not making me look bad. They're making me look smart. And, we're willing to be reasonable. And you're already working with, as a matter of fact, if it's an internal person, you're already working with the organization. And I like to think in terms of using that presentation, meeting, phone call, whatever it is that you're doing to grow the business, using that as an opportunity to give people a sense of what it's like to work with you. So if you just come in and talk about, yeah, we fulfilled this requirement. Yeah, we fulfilled this requirement, that like you usually find in a request for proposal, you're not going to get very far and you're going to look like everybody else. So placement, I would say, go for anything you can. It doesn't hurt to ask, but you do it always with them in mind. We want to give you a productive and satisfying experience. We want to give you everything you need to make the decision here. And we only have 90 minutes. We only have a half hour, whatever. And so from what you've said, it sounds like we need to spend more time here. We'll certainly be respectful of that and give you this information, but maybe we won't talk about that. Is that allowable? So it's always being very gracious about their rules and making everything you do about them.
Because something I've experienced, Kate, and you can tell me your thoughts on this because you'll have a wider diversity of verticals to go at here. But selling to professional buyers, procurement teams, they are trained in the art of buying, to sit opposite salespeople and, well, in my experience, drill us down on price as opposed to anything else. When I've dealt with those in the NHS, they've not always known how to buy, especially if it's a new product or a new service or it's a change in the way that things have been bought. So in my last role, there was a huge shift happening just as I left, from going from capital to monthly payment schemes for all this seemingly historically capital equipment, because then NHS had no capex for each year. They only had kind of monthly revenue based on the number of procedures they were doing. So they didn't know how to buy monthly versus buy capital. So when we would go in and ask, and I say we, it'd be people within the team as well as me, not to blow my own trumpet too much, we'd be asking great questions that would change their buying process. And when we came in last, they probably messed up the first two demos. We'd come in last, help them out, really facilitate the buying process and make it a pleasant experience for them, which, as you said, alludes to then the fact that if you can make that all simple, make all that seamless, then after the purchase, the support afterwards is hopefully going to be the same. Is that an experience that you see elsewhere other than kind of my little world of medical devices, of buyers don't always know how to buy, and that's potentially value that we can add from a seller having sold consistently for years? We've got that knowledge that we can share with them.
Yeah, it's very typical that the buyers don't know how to buy. But in advance of the pitch, they have a very limited role, right? Because ultimately it's the business that's going to make the decision, and then they're going to have to come up to speed. So again, it's being very respectful, not injecting any kind of adversarial tone at that stage. It's just sniffing each other out because they can only go so far. So it's going to be afterward that they're going to play their little role as procurement officers. Might want to put you into a pricing corner, but you've already established a huge value that gone through a huge process to identify a new vendor. They want to work with you, and you have leverage then. So I wouldn't get too nervous about it in the advanced stages. If a procurement person is indeed the one conducting the search, ultimately they're not making the decision. And remember that when you go into that, that's not who you want to focus on. You want to focus on the people in that room.
Right, got it. So we've got that first stage out the way. We know who's in the room. We know the communication style. We know the rational elements of it. We know the emotional elements to it. We know who the decision makers are. What is and this is context dependent, I'm sure, but what is the goal of a meeting like this? Clearly the goal is to win the business, but can we narrow this down into, we want a decision maker to think, feel, do, say, believe something? Is that how we should be looking at this?
Absolutely, Will. You nailed it. Because most of us go into any kind of new business pitch saying, well, I know what the objective is. It's to win the business. It's to get to the next level of decision maker, whatever, in the process. When really we need to scale whatever we think is the objective to what this group is capable of. All right. If this is a task force I'm going to be presenting to, and they're going to be taking their information to a higher level decision maker, their recommendation basically, I need to befriend them and help them in that next step. So I have to get really clear about what I want them to think and feel and do. So that goes back to what you've just done in the first step. I thought about them rationally and emotionally. Now I know what they're capable of. Now I have to project a future state that I want to move them to. And, a lot of people give very short shrift to this, even when I ask them to do it. When we get to the field part, they say, I want them to be excited about the new product or the new process that we're going to be bringing to them. Excited? Really? That's kind of a lame way of thinking about it. You want to think in terms of, I want them to feel confident. I want them to feel like maybe they're avoiding the risk that they're worried about. I want them to see us as trusted advisors. Those are the types of things that are really going to build relationship and are really going to get them to where they need to be. So focus on those. And they aren't always things that you say. They might be things that you demonstrate, and just in the way you structure the whole interaction, or how you ask a question respectfully. That's where you're demonstrating your fit and with their cultural values and those types of things. So get really, really specific about it. And here's the thing, it becomes your strategy statement for that presentation, and probably already has within it the big messages that you want to get across. What this enables you to do is now use that as your guiding star and make sure that everybody on your team, or maybe that one subject matter expert who accompanies you to this meeting, make sure they're in sync with that. And everything resonates with those messages so that people can remember that, and it differentiates you when they leave the room.
Got it. This is amazing. So a couple of things to unpack here, because I think we've covered what we need to do. I want to dive into how we know what to do, because there's a subtle difference there. But something you said that I don't want to gloss over. I've come out of meetings thinking, hey, everyone's excited about this. But I always find this excitement is fleeting. Excitement is, you're excited until you have, in my world, medical devices, a patient is ill. Something doesn't go to plan. Something's cancelled. That excitement, it disappears immediately. But when you build things like trust that become that trusted advisor, I always find, and there may be data, there may be some way to describe this better than how I'm going to describe it now, but I find that it's almost static. If you go into a meeting and you become a trusted advisor, you are that trusted advisor because it's tied to you personally until either you screw up, in which case you have to have an interaction with them to screw up on, or it goes up next time you speak to them. Versus excitement is it's almost like you own the trusted advisor and they own their excitement, and you can't control that, but you can control how you're perceived. Does that make any sense?
It makes absolute sense. And you want something that can be built upon, not a kind of flash in the pan. Oh, that was entertaining, right? Because the next person who comes in, if you're not wise enough to be the last one that they've seen, the next person who comes in, it will be the next flash in the pan that they get excited about. And when everybody looks alike and they're all doing these PowerPoint presentations, those people get confused. I mean, think about it. If you have 5 different competitors and they're each bringing in 5 people doing 5 different PowerPoint presentations, that's mind-numbing, right? So you need to think about how to make it personal and make sure that you're the most important visual aid.
Makes total sense, visual-wise as well, of I can be entertaining when I need to be, when I turn that switch on, but someone just needs to come in and pull a rabbit out of a hat and they've trumped you there, and that's what they're going to remember, right? Okay, so this guiding star, this thing that we're all, the presentation team, and I know, again, going back to medical device sales, it'd be me as the account manager, or whatever the title was, territory manager that we had. We'd have product specialists that would come in and help us, and they were usually ex-nursing staff. They had clinical experience. They would come in. We would then have a logistics person who would help with the demonstrations, and they would be delivering the equipment into theatres, so they would be having conversations with theatre staff, perhaps surgeons as well, or almost inadvertently. They'd be on your team, but I felt like I had to feed him what to say. I couldn't rely on him because he wasn't a salesperson. He wasn't a business person. So I had to feed him and sort him out with some tidbits and things to talk about as he was setting things up. I also had then a trainee on my team as well, a good lad called Chris, and he's an account manager now. I think he's in my role when I left it. So he was perhaps really excitable and had great charisma, but didn't have the knowledge to back up a deeper conversation of this. So how do, with this framework in mind, these group of people, because that makes it real for me, and hopefully I can then make it real for the audience, how do we know what the guiding star should be? Taking account that we've collected all this data at this point, so we're now perhaps in the room. And how the heck do we keep everyone on board with this? Because that's a challenge in itself.
Right. That's why I like to think of this 4-step process as your plan, because whenever a salesperson identifies an opportunity for his firm, he's in that type of situation that you just described, where people in the organization are going to have to help you land that business. So now you're in the position of being a leader, and a leader needs a plan. So use this who, what, the way, the how as your plan. Now, the first thing you're going to do is, from a timing perspective, use it as a project planner and plan that rehearsal time, because we haven't talked about that yet, but that's where you're going to embody the message and get everybody up to ready for prime time, right? And looking like a real team. Make sure you don't give that short shrift. So make sure it's scheduled. And then go and work as much as you can on getting all this information around audience analysis. Now, what I find that salespeople do when they're in situations like you described, and of course I'm not speaking about you personally, but very often a salesperson is very protective of that relationship, right? And what they'll do, instead of getting everybody up to speed and getting everybody feeding into the same strategy statement and singing from the same songbook, what they do instead is say, I'll take care of the relationship. You just do what you do. And that's where you get into problems, because you've got subject matter experts who maybe aren't as adept as you are at being in front of people, comfortably getting up to speed and forming relationship in a short amount of time, answering a question within a confined amount of time, right?
Yeah.
So they need to know what they're about, and not just find out about it in the moment where you kind of, feed them a few, give them a good introduction, that type of thing. What you're going to need is looking at that kind of preparation in advance, where everybody's thinking about the audience and they start understanding it. They tend to be more process people, the ones outside the sales organization, and they need to come on it in a very analytical way. So taking them through this process will make you look like a superstar. What I like to tell salespeople is, in the same way you're trying to give the prospect a productive and satisfying experience, you want to give your internal people a productive and satisfying experience so that they want to work with you. And they're part of a winning team, and you increase your win rate as a result. Ultimately, that's why you want to make this process part of your culture.
Makes total sense. And I guess this goes internally as well. Of, in my example, there'd be one product specialist for the whole of the country, and they may or may not live 10 minutes from your house. So they may have to travel 4 hours, which is the case for, I think, the urology product specialist. She would come up from near London. And so, it's a bit of a pain for her to come and travel up, and she's only going to do it on the big deals. And she's commissioned on the number of urology equipment sold over the whole of the country. So there's an element here of, I think you used the word leadership to describe this. And this is why I like these conversations. And this is why I wanted to just touch on this specifically, because this is a trait and a skill that we develop as salespeople. And I think we can have an open and honest and frank conversation here of, sales is frigging tough. You're getting battered every single day from all kinds of directions. So people want to make that move, whether it's management, whether it is on the quick path to CEO through being a CSO and things of this nature, or sales enablement. And so leadership comes into this. So this is why I like these kind of conversations, because it transcends just how to sell. And it gets into the realm of how to just be a business person, better individual in this.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so I can see you trying to jump in here, but I want to dive through some more of this, Kate, just to kind of get as much value from you as possible. So the way, I know we've only covered half these topics here, but the way. So is there a structure to a presentation? Should we be storytelling? Should it be facts and figures? Should there be slideshows and presentations? I know I'm throwing a lot at you here. What should we be looking to do in this 20-minute, 40-minute slot that we've got? We know the objective. We know our strategy statement. The team's on board. Everyone's prepared. We know the people in the room. What does the middle bit look like?
Well, now you're moving into the tactical stuff. And before you ever think about slides, videos, whatever you're going to show, you're going to think about the storyline. And the storyline is going to be based on what you know about that audience and what those decision makers think is a good meeting, right? And how they like to take in information based on any clues that you've received. So you need to map that out first, and map it out in a way that you're not memorizing a presentation. You just know that these are the points you have to hit, and that you're going to hit them in this order. Then, and only then, after you've mapped out, and by the way, mapping out can apply to one presentation. It can be a mapping out of a visit to your facility, right? That's another way. And who's going to cover what message, and how are they going to tie back to the big strategy statement with everything that they do? So you think that through first, and then you start thinking about, okay, what's going to help the audience? See, everything's about the audience. So what's going to help them? What's going to reinforce that idea? Okay, maybe they heard us say it, but maybe they need to see it too. What this comes down to is that I know PowerPoint is ubiquitous, but think of it this way. It is not your script. It should never be your script. Your map is your script. You can glance down at it, but otherwise you should just sound like a human being who's having a discussion and who has thought deeply about that audience and wants to make sure that they're having a productive and satisfying experience. So the way is really those two steps: mapping out something first, and then thinking about the visual aids that will help the audience. A little tip, a little something that I do when I do have consulting engagements, or if I'm training a sales team. in this process, what I like to tell them to do is to think of this particular stage as a way of, and I mentioned this earlier, giving the prospect a sense of what it's like to work with you. So really, what I'm seeing people do more of is come in and instead of just following that RFP and say, okay, click off all of the boxes, I guess you should hire us now.
Yeah.
What they do instead is come in and say, okay, based on what you told us and everything, all the conversations we've had so far, this is what we know or think we know about what you'd like to see in a business partner for this purpose. Okay. And you list them. And then you stop and you say, is there anything that we missed? And you let people in the room speak to that. And maybe you add, well, based on our being around the block a few times, we might add a couple bits more here. And you get this list, you get them to kind of say, okay, yeah, that seems complete enough. And then you just, the appropriate person on your team starts firing off answers and based on the priority that you asked them, where do you want us to start? It looks very flexible. It looks very service oriented, and it's all about them. And that's a really good way to give them a sense of what it's like to work with you. Now, here's the only proviso. When we talk about rapport, salespeople talk about rapport. My short definition of rapport is what the other person thinks is rapport. So I just described to you a fairly freewheeling, different type of meeting, very differentiating. But here's the thing. If you know your audience is very analytical, and they would be taken aback if you came in and the first thing you did was throw it to them and say, so what do you want to know? Right? No, that's not consistent with our culture. Maybe you're talking to a group of engineers and that you need to give us a body of work that we then digest and then respond to. Those are the types of things that will determine how you conduct that meeting, which is why you need to put the strategic ahead of the tactical, because structure is tactical. Slides are tactical.
Got it. And I think I've got an example of this of my first role, which first role out of university. So I did a degree in chemistry. I went into chemical sales, so selling chemical catalyst into the pharmaceutical industry. For anyone who isn't a huge nerd, who that makes no sense of, essentially platinum, palladium, gold, silver. You can add it to certain chemical reactions. It speeds it up, and you don't lose the element itself. It can be pulled out backwards from the process at the end of it. That's why it's a catalyst as opposed to part of the reaction itself. So we would sell, and palladium can be, I think it's about $50,000 a kilogram, and we'd ship kind of like 20, 30 kilograms a pop. And it was almost a customer service role, stepping into sales at that point. But I would get on the phone with these chemical engineers, and the goal would be to not necessarily sell them because it was the biggest organization, it was the best organization to buy these products from, and they needed it. So it was a simple, easy process to kind of give them product and get cash out of their hands. But as soon as I tried to have a conversation of, hey, Jerry, what are you doing this weekend? They would immediately shut off because these were chemical engineers. They were huge nerds, even more so than myself. And they just wanted to talk about chemistry. Now you turn that on its head. You spend an extra 5 minutes at the end of the call, at the end of the presentation, the meeting, talking about how the chemistry or how the reactions could potentially be improved, how the plant conditions could change, any of this stuff. That was a differentiator for us because in that organization, there were some of the brightest minds in the country here in the UK from a chemical standpoint, both chemical engineers, straight chemists, which is what I was, pharmaceutical agents as well, pharmacological, or whatever that word is. There's irony in me not pronouncing when I'm describing someone being smart. There's irony there, me not pronouncing the title correctly. But that was the differentiator working with us of if I didn't know the answer, I'd pass you on to someone who certainly did. So just a example of culture where the rapport from them was to have as quick a conversation as possible, unless you were going to talk about double helixes and bonds and hydrogen. So with that said, Kate, one thing that I want to clarify here. So you said the word storyline. When we are building this presentation, are we building in arcs, narratives, the hero's journey? When you say storyline, are we being literal about that? Of if you go this way, this is going to happen. If you go this way, this is potentially what's going to happen if you go with us, and you got the peaks and troughs in the story? Or am I taking that too literally?
I think the essential question there is, what do we mean by story in business? And yes, we can go back to all of those epic, the hero's journey, that type of thing, if it's appropriate to that audience. If it's really their story and the way they like to think about themselves, then you're going to be right on track.
Right. So
But it
let
may
me
be
just jump in here a sec. So if we were selling not to chemistry, not to chemist, if we were selling to perhaps an ad agency, then it would be appropriate to have some kind of story arc, hero's journey story in there, right?
or a startup that is now ready, right? To maybe they're going to be going public, right? And they're making all of this investment and their brand is so important. It's about making them feel important and getting and feel showing that you feel the same level of excitement and intensity that they do. All right. So then it's absolutely appropriate, and you might want to go that route. I'll give you an example. Well, you can swap stories here. But, I told you I was in advertising and marketing. And one time for a government bid, our team literally ended the presentation with a song and dance routine. Now, that was a very strategic move. We were bad at it. People were laughing. But as we were walking out, we asked for the business in this respect. And so we did a parody of some song. When we were going out, people said, here it's supposed to be a very official type of process we're going through. And they're helping us move everything out for the next vendor and saying, we really hope we get to see you again, But what had we done? We knew that the new chief marketing officer was looking for smart, savvy marketing people. And we had spent the entire presentation being that. But he was also looking for people who were going to break the mold, who were going to shift their brand. And by the way we ended, we showed that we were that right mix. Now, here's the thing. We go back to the agency. We're high-fiving one another. And we say, wow, that was great. That whole idea, ending with a song and dance, we got to do that all the time, right? That'll be our signature. Whoops. Now it's become about us and not the audience. And it's no longer a strategic piece of evidence. All right. So we're not going to go in front of the Pentagon and do a song and dance. Right. So you have to think in terms of how you do these things for the audience. But I will tell you one thing, a good test for anybody, if you're a story just has to do with in business, has to do with why am I organizing things this way? Why am I doing this for the audience? And letting them know that. When you hear a presentation where every transition in that presentation is, and on this slide, as you can see, and what I wanted you to know from this slide is that it's all the slide driving them. I know they started with the slides and there is no storyline. There's no reason. They're just taking us through a laundry list of information you want me to know and want to pour into my head. That is, that is not respecting your audience. So just at least hold a structure for them and tell them up front, look, we thought we'd do it this way because this would be productive and satisfying for you.
Got it. Because I've sat through and I've been on the wrong end of these slideshow presentations. And I used to use Prezi, the presentation software, and just to kind of give me a platform that wasn't so linear, straight, and predictable for the audience, no matter what it was. But turning this all on its head, and I'll ask you this, and I think the answer is going to be ubiquitous, unequivocally, the answer is going to be yes. Should each of the presentations that we're giving be bespoke? Should they be created from scratch for each of these audiences?
They need to be tailored for each of the audiences. I don't want anybody to think that you have to throw everything out and reinvent the wheel, because these new business pitches are time sucks. They take you away from your existing business. So you want to have a process that helps you tailor things, but also doesn't put undue stress on your organization. And yes, you'll get better at it. Yes, you may create something specifically for that pitch that might be able to be used elsewhere. But what I don't want people doing, and as you can anticipate, is taking a canned speech and saying, okay, how are we going to use this? Pull out the typical slides. And now somehow we're going to force it to work in this situation. You're going to be selective, right? Some things you're going to be able to use, but you might minimize other things. And it's always going to be based on what that audience needs.
So, Kate, to wrap up here, the how. So we've touched on rehearsals. Clearly, that's important. I think we could probably spend a whole 40 minutes drilling into both my mind and the audience's mind, how important it is not to get up there and blag stuff, but to have it rehearsed, to have objections fired at you, to know and have even the industry experience to be able to answer these questions. So put that to one side for a second. Is there anything else we need to do in the how that is kind of explainable and transferable and actionable to the audience? Should we always stand up? Should we always be giving eye contact? Should we always be not looking at the slides, always looking forward? Is there anything that salespeople do wrong that is a quick fix that's going to have a big impact for us?
Well, I guess I'd start answering that question by saying the thing you need to realize is that, and I said this earlier, you're the most important visual aid. That has implications. You need to be seen. If that means standing up when everybody else is sitting down, then you do that because the audience needs to see you, right? Now, we need to forget this difference. Stand up is formal and sit down is casual. There are a lot of very formal board meetings that are conducted sitting down. And there are a lot of casual meetings where if you need everybody to focus on the same thing, you need to stand up. So again, you do it for the audience. And you want to create that connection. So I'm so glad you mentioned this whole thing about, looking at the slides and everything. Part of the reason you rehearse is that you get comfortable enough embodying the message so that you can spend most of your time looking at the audience. Now, some people try to use a little, they try to put their computer in front of them and stand and look at that computer so that the reasoning being, I'm always facing the audience. I do not recommend that because what you're doing, everybody else is looking at the slides that are being projected and you're looking here. You're giving them 2 points of focus. So you need to get as close as possible to your slides. You need to interact with those. But whenever you catch yourself, and I have a certain technique I use that I train people in that works in small forums as well as 5 forums with 500 people. But the basic idea is that you deliver 1 unit of thought to one person, and you establish that the minute you start speaking. And when a slide comes in and it's another point of focus, you tell them where to look, and then you turn, and then you go back to that one thought to one person. So you become the facilitator for that slide. You're not leaving them on their own to figure out, where's that word? Where is he now? Right? You're showing them. And you stay close to it so that you're always in the equation, not some disembodied voice. And where at some point, different audience members are going to say, oh, forget whatever he's droning on about. I want to look more closely here.
So just so I've got this right in my own head, because I'm going to do this the next presentation I do. You're making a statement, blah, blah, blah. Then you go to the next person, next statement, next point, next person. When a new slide comes on. And I guess this translates into the slides that we will have at the end of the day of, we'll only put a slide on when there needs to be a slide. We will go to it, look at it, talk people through it, and then bring people away from it and come back to us and go back to the individuals.
Right, come back to me. Right. I'm the most important visual aid. I'm the one that is going to facilitate your understanding of this. But you touched on the right thing, Will, and that is you have to construct slides that help you do that easily, right? And if you have 16 background bullet points, and it's going to become difficult to do that. So I always tell people, forget that this is not your script, right? This is something that's just going to reinforce a point that you're making. Deal with it as long as you do, and then stand in front of it because you don't need it anymore. You made the point, and now get them to come back to you because that's where the relationship is built, right? That's where you give them a sense of what it's like to work with you.
This may be a cliche example. It may be a good example. It may be a bad example. Give me your thoughts on this, Kate. But should we be aiming for the stereotypical Steve Jobs kind of one word, one image on a slide and kind of going back and forth between that? Or has that been done now? Because I remember the first iPhone, the first iPad, amazing presentations. But now everyone seems to be not ripping off that style. And that style is certainly better than 15 bullet points on a white page with a crappy little logo in the top corner, which is the corporate world that I'm from. that would be the presentation that we typically give out. And then people would print it out as well. So people aren't even looking at the screen or inadvertently looking at you. They're looking down at a piece of paper of printed slides. But come back to the question, is that Steve Jobs kind of simple slides, every kind of 3 or 4 minutes, a new one? Is that what we should be aiming towards?
Aiming towards, but I wouldn't use it as your goal. Because once again, it's about the audience and what they need. Let's go back to those chemical engineers that you were talking to. They would find that very unsatisfying, wouldn't they?
They
right?
will tell
Not
you what they
detailed
would
enough.
want. In hindsight, from the conversation, they would probably want you, if you were talking about specific chemical reaction, they'd probably want a model, a physical kind of hydrogen, helium, carbon model to be handed to them to hold and look at,
Right,
perhaps, and then
right.
perhaps you
And
take it
that's a
back off
visual
them.
aid.
Yeah, yeah.
Right,
That probably would
right.
be way
That's a
more
good
effective.
visual aid.
Yeah, interesting.
One thing, if you do decide to move into something like that, or you want to use a handout, never give people the handout when you walk in the room, right? Because you've already lost the focus on you. So you need to establish yourself as the ringleader here, right? And I will tell you where to look when. And then they start trusting you on that level. Oh, no, all will be made clear. You do it so that you're sequencing information and making it easier for them to take in. Because when you don't do that, people go where they want to go and people get ahead of other people, and you really don't have the whole group there. You don't have their attention. So be very careful of that. But yeah, it doesn't just have to be the Steve Jobs model. That's not even suited to a lot of business presentations. So less is more, yes, but you do that because the audience can only digest so much, right? And give them what they can handle. And certainly don't put a lot of things on a slide just to say, well, I only have 10 slides, right? You sequence the information to make it easier for them to take in. So it doesn't matter how many slides you have, really.
Perfect. Kate, love it. I've got one final question to ask everyone that comes on the show, so we'll wrap up with this. And that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give her to help her become better at selling?
I would probably tell my younger self that selling is a life skill. And I say that because as a young woman, I got a lot of signals in business that I wasn't the right type, that I wasn't a salesperson. And if I believed that, I wouldn't have started my own business, right? But what I learned is that it's about communication. It's about making it about the other person as quickly as possible so that we engage them and we get their attention. And when you understand that, you have the power to influence, to persuade, to help them set aside maybe objections they have in their minds. You put them first, right? And you listen to them and they feel heard, and now they're ready to hear you. And you just practice these very simple kinds of principles, and you use a process like the one we talked about that makes sure you stay connected to them, because that's the easy way to make it about them. Make everything you do, right? Starting with audience analysis, make everything you do about and for them. Then you're going to have that influence. Then you're going to be successful. So yeah, wish I had learned that earlier.
I appreciate that. I'm going through this with my little brother at the moment. He's just about to graduate. He's done a chemistry degree as well, but he'll end up in marketing and business at some point. And I'm trying to explain to him that sales is a life skill, that a couple of years in sales, if you want to be a manager, if you want to be an entrepreneur, it's an invaluable skill to have because it translates to so many other areas. And he had it in his head. I took him to when we did the Sales Podcast Live over in San Francisco at the beginning of the year, I took him over there, and it blew his mind that salespeople, especially in the B2B world, perhaps some of these still exist in other places, but aren't slimy car dealership, used car salespeople. The stereotype doesn't exist in this complex, high-value B2B world, and it blew his mind. And he may not listen to me because I'm his big brother, and I think there's a barrier to listening to your parents perhaps at certain ages, or your kind of siblings at certain ages. But I really think, and I really encourage the audience as well, if you're listening to this and you don't think you're suited to a particular type of sales, you don't think you're being told that you're not suitable for sales at all, I think there's a job, there's a role, there's a product for everyone, and it's something that you just got to uncover and dive into yourself. When that, Kate, tell us a little bit about the book, because I feel like I know we've only scratched the surface of it here. So for anyone who is listening to this episode, who has ingested and took in some of the information, but feels like they need me to write a 15-page blog post to explain just the surface that we scratched, tell us where we can find the book, what it's called, and where we can find more about you as well.
Oh, sure. Well, the book is called Speaking with Strategic Impact, and it's written for people who I say make their living or their mark doing presentations. And I define presentation very broadly. Anytime you're delivering information with a purpose in a business setting. So it's for those financial analysts, salespeople, roadshow executives, consultants, project managers. And the people that I think would really benefit from this are the people who maybe are stepping onto that executive track and they maybe think they don't have what it takes, that maybe they think that leadership presence and impact is something that you're born with. It's something on the periodic table, that is, you either have that chemical or you don't. And for them to realize that, man, if I just am disciplined about this process and focused on the right things and use a few of these tools, I can really accelerate my success within an organization. And I see this again and again, Will. People who maybe are more analytical, maybe think that they're not good at telling a story, right? When you give them this process, they all of a sudden rise like cream, because now what we're doing is marrying a technical ability, expertise in a domain area with the ability to communicate, lead, influence. And those are the people that rise to the top. So anybody who wants to rise to the top, take a good read. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, but really you can walk into any bookstore and order it. It is available through Ingram Booksellers. And I'm also an instructor at the Kellogg School of Management in Chicago. You can also go onto my website, LeVanPartners.com, in order to find out more about me and what I do and how I can maybe bring this sales culture to your organization.
Good stuff. Well, I'll link to all of that in the show notes to this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. And with that, Kate, I want to thank you for your time. We'll have you back on in the future because we've only covered half of what I actually wanted to cover here, which is awesome. It means that we've covered a lot of ground and gone deep, which is always good. I think this episode is really practical for the audience. So thank you for that. And I want to thank you for joining us on the Sales Podcast.
And I want to thank you for having me and say hi to Sales Nation.